Boker Tov, Givrin. Ma shlomcha, Scott? Ra. What happened?
It'd be a little different.
Ma shlomcha, Dennis? Tov. Okay, you thought about that a minute, didn't you? Yeah, I wanted to know. I thought for a minute you're going to say Ra yourself. So, okay, well, we have one bad and one good. I guess we'll stop there before we won't tempt anything else. All right. Well, we're glad to have everyone here, including the visitors that are with us this morning. And I want you to first think about Psalm 103. You've been doing some translation work there and turning that in, and we want to take a look at two more verses this morning. We want to look at verses 17 and 18. We begin here with Wachesed Yahweh Me'olam Wa'ad Olam Al Yire'au. Now I'll read it through slowly, a couple of words at a time, and if you'll repeat after me. Wachesed Yahweh Me'olam Wa'ad Olam Al Yire'au. And then the next line is Watzid Kato Livnei Banim. Again, Watzid Kato Livnei Banim. All right, just look at verse 17. It begins with a conjunction wow. Connecting it with the preceding verse, if we go back and take a look there, we were looking at this section where man is, as for man, his days are like grass, like the flower of the field, thus he flourishes. Indeed, a wind passes over him, and he is not, and his place does not recognize him anymore. So we've been talking about the brevity of man's life. And as we go on then into the next verses here, the next verse, we are going to change that to talk about the faithfulness of God. Notice the contrast. The brevity of man's life contrasted with the faithfulness of God. And therefore, we could translate this wow as a but. But the steadfast love of Yahweh is forever. Notice literally, from forever and unto forever. From ancient days even unto ancient days. Olam here used in pairing that has to do with age after age, goes on through eternity. So man has a very brief life. He's like grass in the field that grows up in one day, and then the sun rises, dries it out, and it dies, it disappears. Or the wind blows over him and he disappears, he is no more. But the steadfast loyalty, the steadfast love, the loyal love of Yahweh is everlasting. It's everlasting. It's from age to age. It goes on and on. And that steadfast love is for or upon those who fear him. Yire'au is a cal active participle, masculine plural, and it has a pronominal suffix that's third masculine singular. So it's upon or over or for or concerning those who fear him. Watzid Kato, and his righteousness is livnei banim, for children of children, for grandchildren. In other words, it's for the next generation. This harks back to Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7, where we're told that the iniquity can be passed on to the third and fourth generation. And that's talking about the results, it's talking about the natural consequences and effects of sin. It's not talking about the guilt of sin. Scripture makes that very clear. We're not responsible or accountable for the guilt of our parents' sins, but we are affected by the natural consequences of their sins. But what? But the compassion, the mercy, and the steadfast love of God is to the 1,000th generation. To 1,000 generations. That's the same thought that is given here. And it's the idea that this steadfast, loyal love of God and his righteousness, when those people who fear him receive that, it is also a natural consequence that comes even upon their children's children, comes upon their grandchildren. The effects of our fearing God impact our families. And even our grandchildren are affected by that. They see our faith. They see how God is steadfastly loyal to us in his love, that God is righteous in his behavior toward those who fear him. It causes them to think about spiritual matters. It causes them to consider these things, and they benefit from some of the natural consequences of our righteous behavior and of our faith in God, of our fear of the Lord. So the psalmist is pointing this out, that we as human beings have a very brief life on planet Earth. And we don't live very long. But God's steadfast loyalty continues on. Even when we're gone, it continues on. Even to our grandchildren, he continues to behave in exactly the way he has promised he would, to do the things that he said he would, to fulfill his promises, to continue to offer them the blessings if they will place their faith in him. All of these things continue. He does not change. His message does not change. His character does not change. His actions and deeds do not change. Jan?
In my text, I'm missing banim. Is this...
You're missing banim in your text? You're looking at a hard copy? Let me take a look at it here. I think you'll find it on a line below or above. Yes, it's right above. What happens when the poetry is too long for the line? Then the end of the line is put above or below. Like down here, it'll be below. So remember that when you're looking at a hard copy, that in poetry, if the poetic line is longer than the width of the page, then the end of the line will be taken up a line or down a line. There'll be a square bracket there to show you where it's gone. And that's just in order to preserve the poetic lines. And when we talk about poetry, remember when you're translating, translate showing the poetic lines. And so observe the poetic lines that are in your Hebrew text. And if there's one line in your Hebrew text, there should be one line of English. If there's two lines, there should be two lines of English. As you watch, that poetic division is purposefully drawn and helps us to see the parallelism, just like I've done it up here on the screen. There are two lines of text here that are parallel to each other, and so there should be two lines of translation in English that are parallel to each other. If you look in your New American Standard Bible, or if you look in the ESV, or you look in any modern translation of the Bible, you'll see the poetic books are in poetic lines. And you'll see the lines beginning. Even if it has a very narrow column and margins, you'll see that then as it runs over, it's indented, and then when you get to the second line, it comes back out to the margin again. And that's poetic format. That's poetic format. There are very few Bibles anymore that don't use poetic formatting for the English translation. Yes?
Then the electronic copies kind of run askew of that?
Yes, they do. Because of the problems in inputting it all, and it's still the nature of the progress in getting the electronic editions and databases properly formatted. At this point in time, they haven't formatted them so we can see them as poetic lines. Okay? And so that's a disadvantage of using the electronic and not having a hard copy to look at, is you don't see the poetic lines the way those who have the hard copy are seeing it. All right? Now notice in both of these lines, we have to supply the verb. These are noun clauses. There is no verb. We have to supply it in translation. When we supply the verb in translation like that, we do not put it in italics. We do not put it in brackets. We do not put it in parentheses, because we are not adding to the text. We are merely making explicit what is in the grammar of the text. If you do not put in is here, you are not accurately translating the text. You are not saying what it says in Hebrew, conveying it in English. You must put is in there. And so, again, the translation of verse 17, in case you're trying to keep track of it there, but, and the but is because the contrast with the brevity of man in his life, but the steadfast love of Yahweh is everlasting for those who love him, who fear him, and his righteousness for grandchildren. And it's understood here that's for their grandchildren. It continues on for those who fear him. Yes?
Should we add that in our translation?
I would add it in translation. It doesn't say there. It just says, and his righteousness for his grandchildren. It's a general statement. His righteousness is for grandchildren.
Is that idiomatic? The Banim,
B'nai Banim, yes, it's idiomatic. Literally, sons of sons. And that's why you say grandchildren. Remember that the only way you can say children in Hebrew is to use banim, and it literally is sons, but in certain contexts you understand clearly it's not referring to just sons, just male descendants. It sometimes includes female descendants, and it includes children, because there is no other word in Hebrew to say children. That's why some translations say the children of Israel, and other translations say the sons of Israel, and both of them are misleading. Because it's not talking about infants and young people only, nor is it talking about sons only, just males. It's talking about all the Israelites, male, female, young and old, no matter what their age. B'nai Yisrael, the sons of Israel, or children of Israel, literally should be translated as Israelites, because their B'nai is being used as the idiom to show the class of individuals known as Israel. It includes all of them known as Israel. So remember that B'nai, sons of, children of, can be used idiomatically, can be used in many different settings. Never get locked into translating it the same way in every text. Watch the context to find out which meaning is intended there. It's like the English word bank, men. I know some of you get disturbed by the fact that, hey, wait a minute, I believe in literal translation, so I'm going to translate this as sons regardless of what you say. Well, it's the same in English. We have a word that's bank, B-A-N-K. That English word has two very different possible meanings. One meaning of bank is where you put your money. Another meaning of bank is what keeps a river in its riverbed. Now, which bank is it? If you just say bank, you don't know. And you say, well, why doesn't English have two different words for it? We ought to have two different words so we don't have this confusion. But we don't. You see? You go to Spanish, they've got two different words for those two different kinds of banks. You go to other languages, they've got two different words. But the same as English has only one word for two very totally different things. So in Israel, Hebrew has a word that has many different meanings, not just one meaning. It's the same situation. And so we have to know by context which is intended. But in English, since we're translating into English, we have different words for sons, for children, and for Israelites. So we can translate it to make certain it says exactly what the Hebrew writer intended it to mean and what the people who read at that time understood it to mean, what they pictured in their mind when they heard it. And when they heard B'nai Yisrael, they didn't picture little children running around, and they didn't picture only men. They pictured all of those known as Israelites. And so we make certain our English translation does the same thing. All right? Now, let's go to the next verse. We have here, Leshomrei berito. Leshomrei berito. Everyone?
Leshomrei berito.
Okay, to those who are keepers of his covenant, or to the keepers of his covenant. Why do we say to the keepers of his covenant? Anyone? Why the? Why do I put a the in there? There's no the in the printing there under the lamed. It's just a schwa. Jan?
In the construct form.
Construct state, and what else? One more point. You're on the right track. That's part of it. What's the rest of it? Scott?
it's his covenant.
All right. The word that it's in construct with, Jan put us on the right track. It's in construct. Therefore, we go to the next noun to find out if it's definite. And the next noun has a pronominal suffix on it. And a pronominal suffix is one of the three ways that a noun is made definite. What are the three ways a noun is made definite? Pronominal suffix, what else? The article, the definite article, and what else? Third one. Proper name. If it's a proper name, like Israel, or like Elohim, God, or Yahweh, okay? So it's for the keepers of his covenant, because his covenant is definite, because it has a pronominal suffix. Okay? Lizokre Pikudau laesotam. Let me read it one more time before you pronounce it. Lizokre pikudau laesotam. All right, I'll read it the first two words and then the third word, and you can repeat after me. Lizokre pikudau leasotam. For those who remember his statutes to do them. Okay? For those who remember his statutes to do them. All right? Now, notice here what we have. We have 4 prepositional phrases, all of them defining the recipients of the steadfast love of Yahweh and the recipients of his righteousness. The recipients are those who fear him, even to their grandchildren, those who keep his covenant, and those who remember to do his ordinances or his statutes. By context then, and the way this is going, it's saying that those who receive and who experience the steadfast, loyal love of God and his righteousness are those who are obedient to his word, those who obey him, those who fear him. Those are the ones classified here as the ones who were recipients of his loyal love and of his righteousness. 4 ways to describe them. Notice the parallelism here. You have A, B, C in the first line of verse 17, and A prime, C prime. We don't have the forever part, the everlasting part, in the second half, but that's gapped, and it's understood that it goes on, and it's partly done by to their grandchildren. Some have suggested that we ought to make that livnei banim a B prime instead of a C prime, parallel to me olam wa ad olam. But I think that the parallelism as you go down through the section shows that it should be the recipients rather than making it an adverb of time. And then as you go down further, we have C2, and then we have C3 and D. So we have 4 different references here to those who are the recipients as this is advanced onward in the parallelism that is used. It's a synonymous parallelism in one sense, and yet it's not a totally balanced parallelism. It's a parallelism that seeks to make certain that we rightly understand what is intended, what is meant by those who fear him. There are those who keep his covenant and those who remember to keep his statutes. Okay, any questions on this, John?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand grammar. In verse 18, the prepositional phrase lush, shomre, and lizokre, those are verbs?
Shomre is a cal active participle, masculine plural in construct.
Okay, yeah.
And as a participle, it is a verbal noun.
Okay, so
And as in Greek, when you have a participle with an article, it is translated as a relative clause. Those who do something.
right.
Okay? Does that help?
Yeah, and it would be difficult to have a participle in that category that didn't have any kind of definiteness, it would seem like.
Correct. But it's made certain by its grammatical relationship to birito that it's definite, and then we translate it as though it did have the article, which makes it into the relative clause. Okay? Jeff?
On Lizzo,
Yes.
I have a wow on mine. Am I using the wrong Bible Works font? Or,
I don't know.
what do you use on that? I used this.
I used Bible Works, but who knows what occurred here. Let me try something else. Let me pull up my Libronics and check the Stuttgart text there and compare it. I don't know whether I left that off or whether they left it off. Which version of Bible Works do you have?
7.
7, I do too. You have a wow on yours? In the hard copy? Okay, then I may have just accidentally left it off here. Okay? Thanks for pointing it out. I'll have to correct that. All right? Yes, there's a wow. ulazokre. So we should put the wow in there. Okay, any further questions on verses 17 and 18? Gus?
I have one. Maybe I wasn't really paying attention when you went over this, but when it says those who fear and more fear, it seems like an adjective more than...
Those who fear him, what you're thinking of there is you're thinking that the relative clause is adjectively modifying those, but that's just the nature of the participle. Don't try to convert it into English terms of the way it works. It's a cal active participle, masculine plural. Correct. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Then let's put this aside for now. And we're going to move over to the overhead, and we're going to switch gears and talk about theological dictionaries. And as I'm getting this set up here and turned on, how many of you own a theological dictionary of the Old Testament? Anyone? Okay, what one do you have, Roger?
Oh, are you lost it?
You have which?
Sorry, what you?
Which theological dictionary of the Old Testament do you have?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Okay. Tom?
I have that one.
You have NIDOC, New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis. How many of you have it? Just Tom? This is the best theological dictionary of the Old Testament to have. I have it both in hardback and I have it on my computer in the computer software. And it's just really amazing to have and to use. We'll be taking a look at it here in a minute. And does anyone have Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament? It's 15 volumes. 15 volumes. It's expensive. It takes up a lot of shelf space, and it is very, very liberal. But if you want to have a detailed analysis of some of the words, this is the place to go for it. It's kind of the equivalent of Kittel's in the Greek New Testament. And another one is the 3-volume set, Theological Lexicon of the Old Testament, which is really a misnomer. It is not a lexicon. But they did that because the German translation, Wörterbuch, is dictionary, and Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament is already taken by the other. And so they did TLOT. It's sad because a lot of people misunderstand it. But this was translated, both of these were originally German. This is by Botterweck and Ringren, translated into the English. This one is by Jenny and Westermann and was translated into English. It's 3 volumes. It is somewhat liberal itself. We'll talk about its distinctives. And then the second best one to have is Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. These 2 volumes by R. Laird Harris, Gleason L. Archer, and Bruce K. Waltke. Harris, Archer, and Waltke are the editors of Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, published by Moody back in 1981. It was Evangelical Book of the Year in 1981, together with a book by Michael O'Connor on Hebrew poetry. And this is a 2-volume set. It's also available online on electronic format. I have it in my Logos library, Libronics library, and it is very, very well done. It is really kind of updated and expanded by the new International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis. We're going to look at the words that we were looking at the other day. We were checking out the word for he rejected, ma'as, and as we look at it, we find out that in the way that this is laid out, get this moved out just a hair more so you can see all that's there. There we go. You can see how it's laid out. You have a number given. Now, if you use the hardback copy, always give volume number and pages for the entry. All right? Always give those. And if you're using the electronic version, you can use that number that is given there to identify the location, and always the Hebrew word as printed here with or without vowels, you need to put it exactly as it is here. This one is without any vowels. So you just put the mem, aleph, and samik. And that goes in double quotes. And then it's in New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis. That title is italicized. Comma, 5 volumes. That's the total number of volumes. Comma, edited by Willem A. van Gemeren. Comma, then the volume number that you're using, and colon, and the page number you're citing, parenthesis, and then you give the publisher, Grand Rapids, comma, Michigan, colon, Zondervan, comma, the date, and then end of parenthesis and period. So as you're citing these things, then make certain you cite them correctly and adequately, and make certain that you attribute also the author, because at the end of this article, it says that the author is Eugene H. Merrill. And so in your footnote, that's the first entry. That's the first thing in your footnote entry. Eugene H. Merrill, comma, double quote, mem, aleph, samik, comma, double quote, in, italicized, New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis, comma, 5 volumes, comma, edited by Willem A. van Gemeren, okay? All that information goes in the footnote. And then, of course, when you go to the bibliography, remember your bibliography, where you have commas in the footnote, you have periods in the bibliography. And you also get rid of the parenthesis. So, and then in the bibliography, you might be just quoting in your footnote volume 2, page 833. But the entry in your bibliography, the article concludes on page 834, so it's volume 2 colon, it's 2 colon 833-34 is the full range of the pagination for the entire article. And the full range has to be given in your bibliography. Okay? That's just to let you know. You're not doing that for the paper you're going to be doing for me here coming up. I'll have you do footnotes. I won't have you do bibliography. But coming up next semester, when we're doing Introduction to Hebrew Exegesis, you will be required to do bibliography. And next semester I'll be handing out a form. Plus that, it's very easy to do bibliography, fellows. I provide a syllabus. In the syllabus is a very detailed bibliography. All you have to do is copy what I gave you in the bibliography for the form. And that amazes me year after year, semester after semester, that students have the syllabus and yet don't go and look at how I formatted it and end up with some imaginary formatting that makes no sense whatsoever. And I gave it to you. It's free. Actually, it's not free. You paid for it. All right? You pay for it. You pay for your classes. You pay for the syllabi. Use them. You know, don't just let them sit there. And some of that information is right there. But anyway, as we're looking here at the article, notice first of all, it gives up here, it tells you that ma'as is 1. It's the root 1, root number 1. It's found in the cal, that's what the Q period is. Reject or refuse is the meaning. It's found in the nifal, Ni period, means be rejected. It's number 4415 in Strong's Concordance matching. And then it is also discussed in the, this lexicon is referring to the German translation of the Hebrew lexicon that you know as Halot, H-A-L-O-T. This is Hebräisch und Aramäische Lexikon zum Alten Testament. And so it's H-A-L-A-T. Now why they gave the reference to the German and not to the English translation could be just the peculiarity of Dr. Merrill. That perhaps that's all he used is the German. That's all that most of us had until a few years ago was the German, as I showed you the other day. So he's just probably using that because that's what he's used to using. And then the ancient Near East, tentatively see the Akkadian Meshu, meaning to despise, to have contempt for, especially forgive, disregard sins. Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, volume 10, pages 41 to 42. Then it comes to the Old Testament. And it tells you this verb is attested 76 times in the Old Testament. And as it goes down through, then in the article, it discusses it. Now, if you are citing a reference within the article here, within the entry, and you're using the electronic edition, you can always say ma'as, and then you can put number 1 for the section that you're quoting from so it can be located. Or if you're quoting from section number 2, you can cite it so that it can be located. The reason for doing footnotes is to make it possible for someone to relocate your citation and to check to see if you gave it accurately and quoted it in context. That's the reason for it. It's so people can check up on you, all right? Including your professors can check up on you, see how you're using your sources. And so if you use electronic versions, it is far more difficult then to locate exactly what you're quoting, unless you give some more parameters. Now, one of the things that some people can point out and say, well, but if you're quoting electronically, all you have to do is open up that version and put in part of the quote, and you can find that part of the quote and you can look at it there. Well, that might work in some cases. In other cases, it might come up with 4 or 5 different locations. And so it's always helpful for you to try to identify it as closely as possible. And if you're using Libronics, most of these now have pagination included. And so use the function in Libronics that gives you the proper pagination and paginate it as though you were using the hard copy. All right? So that's the reason for it. But as you go through this article, notice it comes down to the end. It has a full discussion, 2-page discussion, comes down to the end and gets into the Middle Hebrew, getting into the post-biblical period after the Old Testament itself. The Middle Hebrew employs the verb to mean loathe, and the kal be repulsive in nifal. And notice the reference is to Jastro's dictionary that I showed you just the other day. And then it goes through and gives you all the synonyms. Rejection, refusal, disgrace, and shame. What Hebrew words have this concept? Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better here, and I'll just move it. Notice that it says it has an arrow. The arrow means that this same root is listed and discussed within this theological dictionary. So it means see, S-E-E. See gadaf, meaning revile, blaspheme, number 1552. See zanach, number 2, means reject. Number 2396. See ma'an, refuse. See ma'as, number 1, reject, refuse. See na'ats, reject, disdain, or to treat disrespectfully. See na'ar, abandon, renounce. See salah, number 1, despise and reject. So those are all synonyms that you can have. Now, if you want to find out how the synonyms compare, then you've got to look up each of those individual entries in that dictionary to find out how they're used and see if the writers themselves of the entries do some comparative analysis for you. Now, in Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, occasionally a writer will do all that comparative work for you. For example, if you want a word for anger, and you want to know what's the difference between all the different words for anger in Hebrew, and there's about 13 or 14 of them, then go to TDOT and look up af, aleph, pei, af. And the writer who composed that entry goes through and gives a brief paragraph of the distinguishing characteristics of the different words for anger and how they differ from one another. And that is extremely valuable, especially when you have a context where several different words are being used that are synonymous, and you want to know, well, why the different words and what's their distinction? How do they differ? What's the different meaning? What's the different focus? Then you look at those. And here you have the list of them, so you can do that legwork yourself on your own if you want to go look at each of these. And then it lists a bibliography. Now notice that Merrill's bibliography here is very brief and short. Only 3 lines. It refers to some articles like Jensen's The Age of Emmanuel in Catholic Biblical Quarterly. It refers to Kuyper's article, The Repentance of Job in Vetus Testamentum from 1959, and Lofink, Zu Text und Form von OS 4, 4-6, and that's from Hosea 4, 4-6. And talking about the text and form of it in Biblica in 1961. And so you have references there to do further research. Now, the entries in this theological dictionary are not equal because the writers are not equal. For example, Dr. Grisanti contributed to 25 different entries in this theological dictionary. Among those 25, he will tell you, please don't blame me for what's in 7 of them, or 8 of them, whatever they are, that are jointly written. They have not just his name as author, but they have someone else's name as author. And what happened was, when he finished his, he just let the editors know that he was willing to do more work if they had other articles that were not being completed or done. And they wrote back to him and said, look, we have some here that someone has done but is not going to complete, and we're taking it away from them. And we want you to go ahead and preserve basically what they've done because we paid them for it. But can you make certain it's, edited and refined and work on it? And would you be willing to do that? So he said, yeah, I'll do it. It's a couple extra bucks. And sometimes now he may regret it because of being tied to some of the views that are in some of those articles. But if there's more than his name, before you blame him for it, you go ask him. All right? Is this your view or is it the other guy's view? But that's the reason we cite the authors of these articles. Willem van Gemeren, the editor, did not write any of these articles. Well, he may have written a couple of them, but he did not write the vast majority of them. The vast majority of them are written by other people. Don't blame him. Don't say Van Gemeren said, and don't say Nidot says. The series doesn't say anything. The editor doesn't say anything. It's the people who write them. If you disagree with something in this article, you blame Eugene Merrill. If you disagree with something in Hayah, you blame Dr. Grisanti. And if it's joint authorship, be very careful what you say and who you blame, because you may be blaming the wrong person. And so watch out for that. And as I said, they're not equal. Some of the articles are absolutely ridiculous. Some of them are superb examples of lexicographical study and word study. Some of them are very sound in their theology. Some are very poor in their theology. Some give excellent abbreviated bibliographies, and some go page after page with nonsensical bibliographies that looks like they're just padding their bibliography, like some students do sometimes on a paper, to make it look like they did a lot of research, but they only cited 4 sources, but they list 100 in their bibliography. So the professor always wonders, how many did you actually read of those 100, you see? And the same on these. You'll find some guys in here, in fact, there's one individual in particular who always pads his bibliography. And he usually pads it with stuff that really have nothing to do with the article itself. Now, part of that problem of the inequality comes back on the shoulders of Willem van Gemeren, who was the editor. Because as editor, he found it overwhelming. In fact, he told me, he said, I could not do all the editing that was demanded in a 5-volume work like this the way I'd like to do it. He had to tell me that he had not actually read every article that he put his name to here as editor. That's why the editor is not the person you need to blame. Now, he may be partly to blame because he didn't make the writer make changes, but he didn't write it, all right? So blame the writer and make certain you always give the writer's name. And then if we go look at Mashach, the word that means he anointed. By the way, I have a review of this in the Master's Seminary Journal of NIDOT, if you want to get a full review of it and what I think of the entire set and some examples of the good and the bad. You can go to that issue of the Master's Seminary Journal and take a look at my review. I did it back, I think, in 98 or 99. Here we have Mashach, and as we go through it, we see the references here, how it's used. We have the Ancient Near East, we have the Old Testament uses, and it goes on into another page here. Get it down here where you can see the page number, page 1124, page 1125, and on over 1126, where you begin the bibliography, where you have the synonyms here for anoint, including the word soak. And then at the end of the bibliography, then you finally find out who wrote it. John N. Oswalt. The disadvantage of having the hard copy is that there's no listing here anywhere that helps you to say, okay, I want to read all of Dr. Grisanti's articles. How do you find them? Well, you find them the way I found them when I did the review. I went through every single page, page by page by page. I read the vast majority of all 5 volumes to review it. And I went through page by page and located and listed all of his articles, so I knew which articles he did. And that's the way I found them. Now, if you have it electronically, all you have to do is search for Grisanti, and you find them. That's the easy way. And what happens is you begin to use a volume like this, and you read an entry, and you say, wow, this person did a fantastic job. What else did he write? And then you read another one, you say, oh, that one stinks. That just is awful. That didn't help me at all, didn't say anything at all. And I looked at other theological dictionaries, and I found they had plenty to say. That guy didn't do his work. What's his name? I want to avoid everything he's written, you see. And here, I just happened to open it up here. Here's one by Dr. Grisanti that has another name on it. And notice his name is put second. And that is on purpose, because Eugene Carpenter is the original writer of this article on kasaf. Kasaf, root number 2, meaning to desire or long after. And so and it's only a very brief, it's only about a paragraph long, very brief. You can see there's almost the entire article right there. And Dr. Grisanti just did some brief editing on it and got his name on there. But if you look at it here and you see Eugene Carpenter, don't blame Dr. Grisanti for the content unless you check with him first. All right? So if you're going to say something like, well, Grisanti and Carpenter said this and they're wrong, you go talk to Dr. Grisanti and then say it correctly. Carpenter has this wrong. And then put a footnote saying, citing your conversation with Dr. Grisanti on such and such a date that confirmed that it was not his viewpoint, but he was merely editing the article. All right? So be very careful of that. And remember that with other articles that have more than one writer too. You know, sometimes we get very unfair and critical. We need to be very cautious. We need to have an Irenic spirit. We need to be careful what we say. And especially when there's more than one author, we need to rightly understand the situation, even when there's one. Sometimes when we're critical, we need to go talk with that individual and say, okay, what did you mean by this? And am I rightly interpreting you? And am I accurate in the way I'm citing you? That's what I do with Bob Chisholm. If you were at ETS, I gave the response to his address, but we've interacted before because I reviewed his book on the Handbook to the Prophets, and before we published the review, I discussed my review with him, bounced it off of him. He did not like what I said. And we talked about it until we were agreed that even though he didn't like what I said, that it was accurate, it was fair. We had a sincere, honest disagreement over the view of the prophets. And then he could agree for me to go ahead and publish it. Say, yeah, you can go ahead. I don't feel like now I have to write a huge response to you. I'm not going to demand equal space and equal time because you treated me unfairly and you quoted me inaccurately. You see? And we have to follow that same principle of honesty and integrity in quoting the sources we use. Okay? Kyle.
Kind of connected to that, I'm interested. You know, the TMS, you know, kind of our camp has been critical of, you know, say, you know, purpose-driven life or what is it, the Man Book, Wild at Heart, thanks. Guys like that, do we talk to them before we put out things?
Some of the men actually have, yes. Some of them actually have. They've checked with them, talked with them before they've published, had conversations with them, and sometimes they haven't. And, you know, you don't have to talk with someone before you can be accurate. But it's better if you can, and if you're willing to attempt to do that. Okay? Yes, George?
What do you look for to determine an article's good or bad?
I look for the coverage, make certain they've covered everything. For example, one of the articles that deals, I think it was with Olam, you know, the word for age, forever, for eternity in Nidot. I looked to see what they said about the concept of eternity in the Old Testament. Not one single reference to any concept of eternality with regard to the characteristics of an Old Testament believer's salvation. Nothing about eternal life in the Old Testament. That shows that the individual, number one, didn't look at every occurrence of the word. Number two, if he did, he ignored those references that talk about eternal life. And, or number three, by the content of the article, demonstrated that he did not believe that the Old Testament believer had any concept of eternal life. And then number four, if he had that viewpoint and expresses it, then why doesn't he deal with the problem text where it appears that they do believe in eternal life and know about it? And if that passage or passages is ignored in all ways in that article, then that tells me it's an article that is lacking. It is weak. It is either skewed or weak, one of the two. And if it's skewed, it's either skewed out of ignorance or it's skewed intentionally. And that's one of the ways I evaluate. Okay? All right. Let's, Gus, I'll answer your question and I'll look at this and then we'll take a break.
You mentioned that some of these dictionaries are liberal, but if we're dealing with a language, I don't. Why would their point of view, or how would they come across in a dictionary if they're talking about the word?
Okay, excellent question. Because these are theological dictionaries. These are not just dictionaries that give you the meaning of a word. These are dictionaries that look at the word studies and then describe a theological opinion or conclusion with regard to those words and the way they're used. They're developing theology out of the text. And that's why they're called theological dictionaries. They're not lexicons. They're not dictionaries where you look up the meaning of a word simply. And so therefore, NIDOT is evangelical in its theological approach, unashamedly. Tells you right up front in the very beginning in the introductory articles. The same with Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. And the other two here are not. They're liberal in theology. They're done by men who are of Roman Catholic background, Jewish background, Orthodox background, liberal Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, not evangelical Presbyterian, not evangelical Lutheran, and not evangelical Methodist at all. These are men who, many of them deny the deity of Christ. Most of them would say they do not believe that the Scriptures are in their entirety the Word of God. They would deny inspiration and inerrancy. And you'll see that in the writings, in their articles, as they go through. Okay? So remember that. These are theological dictionaries. Therefore, they're very interpretive. And so you need to be on your guard. You need to read them carefully because they are giving interpretive analyses. They're not just talking about the forthright meaning of a word in its various contexts. Mashak, as we look at it here in the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, it is in volume 9, starting on page 43. And it gives you an outline of the contents. Notice the contents. Etymology. Occurrences, meaning and usage of Mashak, general, kings, anointing of kings, talking about the meaning of Mashak in the third root, its usage, its distribution, David, the Psalms, the prophets, late text, later development, the Septuagint, Sirach, one of the wisdom books of the Apocrypha, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can see they give a full historical analysis all the way through. Notice the footnote here of bibliography. Very detailed, and it is continental. It includes mostly German and French resources. It includes some English resources. And then you go through the article. It's very detailed. It goes on from page 43 all the way through page 54. That's 12 pages of material. At the end, you're told that the author is Seybold. You have to watch sometimes because sometimes internally they divide the article up and different parts are written by different authors. Here it's all by Seybold. To get the full bibliographic data, you go to the front of the volume and you find the listing of the names of the contributors to the volume, and you find Saybolt, and you find out that the first initial is K. And so you cite that as an article by K. Saybolt from Basel. You don't put in Basel, you don't put in that information. That's just to let you know where he's teaching. And you can see here, these teachers are from Edinburgh, Basel, from Paris, from Leipzig, from Bonn, from Munster, from Salamanca, from Regensburg, Tübingen, Berrien Springs. That's fascinating. There's an American. All right, G.F. Hassel, Berrien Springs, Michigan. And you go on down through it and find a number of them there. You find out the editor, Ringgren, contributed an article. And so you say Ringgren, Uppsala, Sweden, editor. And go on down through there and see where they're all from. But as you go through these, you'll find, like in this one, that it will say that the word Mashiach and Mashiach, the noun, is never used in the strictly messianic sense in the Old Testament. All right? They will deny that. And they will say it's a later development that comes about the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls or in that period in between the Testaments. And they will say it's a later Jewish development, rabbinic development, but it is not an Old Testament concept. That the Messiah refers to the coming Messiah, referring to Christ in his coming. And so, you have to wrestle with some of those things. And that's an interesting question. Is Mashiach ever used in the Old Testament explicitly of the Messiah? You have to answer that question. But you begin by recognizing that this is a liberal lexicon, or liberal theological dictionary. Therefore, they might deny certain usages that we might see as very clear in certain contexts. But on the other hand, what if we are the ones who are assuming that the Messiah is in the Old Testament and thinking, therefore, since he is referred to, and I believe the Messiah is referred to in the Old Testament, but is he referred to as HaMashiach? That's the question that this article is trying to answer. We have him referred to as the servant of the Lord. We have him referred to as the arm of the Lord. We have him referred to as the Redeemer. We have him referred to as the Son. We have many references to the Messiah in the Old Testament, and he's called the seed of the woman, but is he ever called Mashiach in the Old Testament? It's an interesting question, and a question that you would want to resolve if you're doing a word study on Mashiach and Mashiach. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is theological lexicon of the Old Testament. But, before we do that, look up here on the board. I was asked to provide you with a footnote format for a theological dictionary. And I chose the one on Mashiach that we just looked at in Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. I just gave a hypothetical footnote number 3. Remember, the first line of a footnote is indented, and the other lines of the footnote come out to the left-hand margin. K. Saybolt is the author, comma, Mashiach is the article. This is the only time that you put Hebrew in double quotes, is when it's in a title like this. This is the only time you put Hebrew in double quotes. Never put Hebrew in double quotes when you're internal to a paper and talking about a Hebrew word. You just give the Hebrew. And because it is pointed in this article on the title, on its first page, you must put the pointing in, comma, in double quotes. The comma goes inside the double quotes. In Theological Dictionary, I've got it underlined because I can't italicize in print here. So just to let you know, that's italicized, comma, 15 volumes. That's the total set. Comma, edited by G. Johannes Baderwick et al. Means and others. No comma before et al. Now, why didn't I give all three? G. Johannes Baderwick, Helmer Ringgren, and Heinz Joseph Fabry? Well, I didn't want to get writer's cramps writing it on up here. And you may not want to get typist cramps typing it all out. And so if there's 3 or more editors, or 3 or more authors, you're only required to give the first one that's listed, and then to say et al. All right? And so that's what I did. Translated. You always have to include translator. Translated by David E. Green, And David Green did not translate every volume of TDOT, so watch to make certain which volume you have and which one's the translator. The publisher, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Here I use the postal code abbreviation, MI, 2 capital letters. You can use that postal code abbreviation, or you can use MICH, period. But whatever you use only one method of abbreviating states throughout your entire paper. Never mix them. Use only one and only one. William B. Erdman's Publishing Company, 1998. That's the date for the volume 9. End of parenthesis, volume 9, page 44, period. And as you go back through this to format it for bibliography, in the bibliography you put Saybold first. Why? Because the bibliography is arranged alphabetically by the surnames of the authors. What do you do if there's more than one author or editor at the beginning? You only reverse the first one, because only the first one is going to be alphabetized. You don't alphabetize by the other names, so their names just stay the same. So it's Harris, R. Laird, Gleason L. Archer, and Bruce K. Waltke, editors. You don't reverse everyone's name, only the first name. Only the name that's being alphabetized is reversed. So this would be Saybold, K, period, quote, Mashak, period. Remember, the commas change to periods in the bibliography. Capital I, because it follows a period. In, Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, period. 15 volumes, no comma, capital E, unedited by G. Johannes Bardewegh et al., no comma, capital T, untranslated by David E. Green, and then, comma, 9:43-54, period, to show the entire page range of the entire entry. And then no parentheses, Grand Rapids, Michigan, William B. Erdman's Publishing Company, 1998, period. All right? That's how you do the bibliography. Okay? And it's easy, as I said. All you have to do is go to the syllabus and see what the bibliography is. Use the TMS Theses Guidelines, available free, online, downloadable. All right? It's right there, Theses Guidelines. It's all available, ready for you to download and use, with examples and samples and how to abbreviate Bible book names. We don't use periods at TMS on Bible book name abbreviations. Bible book names are abbreviated within parentheses in the body of a paper and always in footnotes, but never anywhere else. You spell them out. Okay? So be certain you follow those things. Now, let's get to what we're at so I can tell you what to do for your word study on Sha'an. We're on the Theological Lexicon of the Old Testament, and as we look at the entry for ma'as, to reject, we find it here, and we go through and notice first of all let's zoom in here a little bit. It tells you the different places to go for it, BDB and Halot and TDOT, TWOT and NIDOT. And notice here, this is the distinguishing characteristic of TLOT, Theological Lexicon of the Old Testament. They give you charts to define the usages. This is an overview of the passages using ma'as root 1. And remember, it occurs only in 2 stems, kal and nifal. The nifal here is in parentheses. And so you look at it, the profane usage, the theological usage, the theological priestly usage, the theological God or divine usage, theological priestly usage, 3 times in Leviticus, 2 times in Numbers, once in Judges, 9 times in 1 Samuel. Notice you can see the distribution here. 72 times total in the Old Testament, 72 kal, 3 nifal. And as you go on through and you look at all of these, you can see the different types of usages. You can see the way it's used. You can see the dominant profane usages are in Job. And it gives you the full range here. And they'll often break these down to where they give you the noun usages and give you the different stem usages as well. And then it goes into a detailed discussion. And here, listing the parallel terms, these are all of the synonyms. Compare the synonyms given here with the synonyms given by Eugene Merrill in NIDOT. They should be the same since he referred to it. Antonyms. He didn't talk about antonyms, opposites, but they have the opposites. And then talk about how ma'as is used in relationship to other words. Now notice as you go through here that you have an arrow saying see, but for ga'al there's no arrow. Why? Because ga'al is not listed in TLOT. That's the other thing you have to learn about TLOT. TLOT, Theological Lexicon of the Old Testament, only selects the discussion of key theological terms in the Old Testament. It does not discuss every term. NIDOT does not discuss every term. Some of the terms you have to look up under a general subject category in English in Volume 5 to find discussion. That's one of the critiques I have about NIDOT. With a set that big and with that much, they should have tried to cover everything. TDOT is exhaustive. It covers everything. Theological Word Book of the Old Testament is exhaustive. It covers everything, including Aramaic. The Aramaic volume of Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament is due to come out in the near future. The New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis doesn't have a separate Aramaic section. And when you go here then, we look for Mashach, and we'll look for Mashach in vain, because we'll find a little note. Mashach, to anoint, see Melech, king. So we go to Melech, we find Melech, king, and we have a note here with regard to Mashach, but the article does not deal very much with Mashach. The table of occurrences for king, as it goes through here, the Cal, the Hifil of Malach, the masculine and feminine of Malach, and the different roots, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the total numbers, all of those, you have all the tables, but they do not list Mashach. When you get to Mashach, it's finally back on page 676, and they start talking about the root Mashach, which offers many equivalents to Malach, Hifil, goes through and discusses it on one page only. That's all you have for Mashach. You get to the end of the article, and you find out who wrote it. J.A. Sagan. John Sagan wrote it. Okay? And so that's where you get the author. You go to the end of the article to find the author. And you have the pagination for it. All right? So this is more limited than any other theological dictionary of the Old Testament. It has fewer entries, fewer words. It is primarily theological in nature, but the advantage is it gives you tables of usages, statistical tables that no one else gives, that can be very helpful and insightful to see. Then we come to Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, Harris, Archer, and Waltke. And we go to their listings, and we find that because it is a much shorter dictionary, it has a lot less in its listings. It can't take up as much space as some of the others. And it's in dual column format. There's numbers given for it here if you have the electronic edition. You come in, it says ma'as 1 means to reject or despise. Ma'os is refuse and occurs only in Lamentations 3:45. That's a noun. Off-scouring and refuse you make us. Examination of some 73 uses of this verb reveals, and it goes on down through the discussion. At the end of it, of the article, it refers to THAT, which is all we had at that time of this. This English edition, the translation by Mark Biddle of TLOT, came out in 1997. And that is 16 years, actually 17 years, before the publishing of TWOT. So they're referring to THAT because that's all they had, the German edition of it. And it's the Theologische Handwörterbuch zum Alten Testament. edited by Jenny and Westermann. And it tells you what volume and page numbers for Ma'as, and then it says WCK. To find out who is WCK, you go to volume 1, you go to the list of contributors, and you look it up. It's Walter C. Kaiser. All right? So he's the one you blame for the entry on Ma'as. Now, if you go to Mashak and you look it up, here it is, Mashak, anoint, spread a liquid, and you'll find that it goes on for 3 columns. It goes on to a 3rd page here, and at the end of the article, and it deals with the different ones that are nouns as well in the article, it says bibliography, goes through the bibliography, gives you some of that to look at, and has VPH, Victor P. Hamilton, is the author of Mashak. And so now you know who to blame for anything that's said in there and how it refers to things. If you're ever dealing with a word like tzedek, righteousness, mishpat, judgment, anything that has any legal flavor to it whatsoever, the very best, top-notch treatment of those groups of words having to do with legal realities is in TWOT. None of the others can even touch it in the way that that's handled. Some of them are done by the late Leon J. Wood, one of the greatest Old Testament scholars of our time, a man thoroughly evangelical, very convinced of biblical inspiration and inerrancy, and solidly committed to interpreting the Old Testament in its context and sticking with the Hebrew text. A man that I greatly admire. He's produced some wonderful works. One of his best is his work on the book of Daniel. He has a commentary on Daniel that is the very best commentary on Daniel available in print today. I don't care where you go, what you look at, he's got the very best. And he does the very best in here. But then you turn to another article on Sheol, and you find out that it's primarily written by R. Laird Harris. And R. Laird Harris says in that article that Sheol refers only and always to the grave, nothing more. Only a physical grave. Totally annihilates, ignores, and misconstrues all those passages that clearly refer to a place of departed spirits. Yes, Sheol in some cases refers to the grave, but not always. And so his other 2 co-editors, Archer and Waltke, decided, well, we can't deny him the privilege of publishing his article in this. He's a co-editor after all. But we are the majority of the editors, so we're going to give a majority opinion. And so it's the only article I know of in TWOT that has 2 entries. One to present one view, and the second to present the majority view of the editors. And they then lay out their argumentation and presentation of how they would write the article with their conviction that it does not always refer to the grave, that it often refers to the place of departed spirits. And they lay that out and explain it in very great detail. So if you ever want to have a synopsis of the debate on Sheol, go to TWOT. It's all there for you. It's ready for you to look at and to handle. Now, someone asked me during the break, what should I get as a student, as a new pastor? What should I have in my library for Hebrew studies? Number 1, you need a good lexicon first. And I would recommend highly HALOT, okay? Hebrew and Aramaic Lexicon of the Old Testament, Kohler and Baumgartner. You ought to have a good lexicon. Holiday is a stopgap measure. Holiday is what we use here because it's easy to carry around. Holiday is a good one for you to travel with and things like that. Take with you on vacation. It doesn't take up a lot of space, not as big and heavy, not as expensive as HALOT. But you need to have a good lexicon. And HALOT is the best, so why not go with the best? And it's available now in a 2-volume edition. I understand soon to be made available in a 1-volume edition. And I'd get it. It's available electronically. You can have it on CD. I have it. It's part of the Libronics system that I have. Then you need to have a concordance. For a concordance, Evans Shoshin is the very best. Second is Mandelkern. You need to have one of those two concordances. You say, but I have software. I can do all the searches with software. If you're convinced that you have adequate to do that on your software, then skip over your concordance and leave it to later, but I would highly recommend that sometime you get hold of a hard copy of a concordance, because you need something that you can trust to check on your software results, because in software it's garbage in, garbage out, and it's not always accurate. Number 3, you need to get a good theological dictionary of the Old Testament. If you're strapped for funds, go for the cheapest theological word book of the Old Testament. And it is very good. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. If you're not strapped for funds, or if you want to go to CBD and get it for $139, get NIDOT. It's the best, with TWT being second best, a very close second best. And eventually in the pastorate, you will want to have both. Eventually in the pastorate, you will want to have both. So plan eventually to get both of them on your shelf, so that you have plenty of resources. You'll enjoy that, you'll appreciate it, and you'll like it, especially when you find an article in NIDOT that is lousy, and you go to TWT and find the corresponding article is a lot better. Or vice versa. The exact reverse can happen. But it gives you the better opportunity of getting at least one good article on those Hebrew words. That's what I recommend. Now, yes, question.
Could you spell Shoshin and Mandelkern? So
Evan Shoshin is a hyphenated name. E-V-E-N hyphen S-H-O-S-H-A-N. Mandelkern, M-A-N-D-E-L-K-E-R-N.
thank you.
Okay? Now, before we get any further, I need to tell you what to do for your word study you're to produce for me and turn in next week on Sha'an. All right, I'm going to give it to you in order. You are to produce a 1-page summary on Sha'an. 1 page. Be certain you put the title at the top, that it's a word study of Sha'an. Put your name and put your box number. Then, the first section, you go to the lexicon. Give the lexicon's meanings for Sha'an and any statistics that are available from the lexicon entry. Number 2, go to a concordance. It has to be either Evans Shoshin, Mandelkern, or Lazowski. No other concordance will do. You cannot use Englishman's Hebrew Concordance for this assignment. You must use one of those 3. You go to the concordance and you check the statistics. And you describe the distribution. What do I mean by distribution? Where is it found dominantly? Is there any particular book of the Old Testament or writer of the Old Testament that accounts for most of its usages? Third, you go to the theological dictionaries. In the theological dictionaries, list the synonyms and list anything that you can summarize about its theological significance. And lastly, do any of these 3 provide you with anything that looks interesting as a potential source for you to go to for more information? So look in the lexicon article to see if there's any references there to sources that look like they might be something you need to follow up on or might want to follow up on if you're going to do a detailed study of the word. Or in the Theological Dictionary especially, check out the bibliography. Okay? This is one page. Be concise, be brief, be to the point. Don't waste space, don't waste time. You've got too much to do at the end of the semester to waste a lot of time. Be efficient. Use these things and get them back on the cart in the library for others to use. Photocopy out, if you need to, the pages and take them home to work on, to formulate. But you should be able to summarize all of this on one page. All right? One page. You should be able to do it double-spaced, but I'll accept it single-spaced. Because I want you to be concise. That's the reason I'm saying that you can do it double-spaced, but I'll accept single-spaced. Kelly?
Do you want it in paragraph essay form, or can we break
No.
it up, outline?
No.
Like,
I do not want it paragraph essay form. I want as concise as possible, which means when you give the meanings, you just list the meanings, period. You don't put them in full sentences. Statistics, you just list the statistics. And what are the statistics? Identify. Are you talking about cal, nifal, PL, HIFIL? What are you talking about? What are your statistics about? Total usage, partial usage, related forms? Just put it as briefly as possible. Right. Okay. John? It's written for you in your syllabus. You're lazy, John. No. I don't believe it. Cheyenne. That's not Cheyenne, by the way. That's the capital of Wyoming, where I was raised. Yes?
can we not put the pointings in the title?
No, you must put the pointings in the title. All right, to answer the question. You may have to cut and paste it out of somewhere. But that's fine, cut and paste. You can cut and paste, you know, online there are free Hebrew Bibles. And the free Hebrew Bibles online are all kinds of different fonts and they're all kinds of different things. And you can go online and you can cut and paste out of those and put them into your documents and, you know, use them. And if they're a font that isn't recognized or that you need to download the font to be able to recognize or read it, you know, make certain you've got a good site that you can download the font for, and go ahead and put that in, and then do a PDF file for me. If I can't read the Hebrew font, it's not going to help me any to know what you're saying. So usually a PDF file, and if you don't have a PDF writer on your computer to create PDF files, I know people look at it and say, I can't afford Acrobat Professional. Well, you don't have to have Acrobat Professional. There is a free online PDF creator, PDF printer that IT department recommends because it's safe and it's good. I've got it on my wife's computer. She loves it. It's called Qt PDF. Just go to www.qt.com and download it free. And you can take any Word file and convert it to a PDF file, and it will preserve exactly what your page has and all its fonts, and everyone else can see it regardless of whether they have those fonts or not on their computer. So just go download that for free. www.qtpdf.com. C-U-T-E. Qt. All right? Okay, everyone clear on what I want? Yes, Eric.
Sections, are we to just pick one resource?
You are only required to use one resource for each of these. One resource. On the lexicons, you're limited to Evan Shoshin, Mandel, Karen, and Lazowski. The concordances. On the lexicons, you're limited to Kohler and Baumgartner. BDB, the reason I'm allowing BDB is to help you see how bad it is. All right? And Klein's. Those are the three. Klein's, Kohler and Baumgartner, and BDB are acceptable for the lexicon, not Holiday. All right? I want you to use a bigger lexicon. I want you to use a fuller lexicon. For a theological dictionary, any of these four are acceptable. Yes, Kelly.
Footnoting our sources?
I want you to footnote your sources. I want you to footnote which ones you used for these. That's the reason I gave you the footnote pattern. No bibliography. I want you to try to keep it to one page. I want it to brief. I want it to be brief. I want it to be concise. I don't want it to hog your time at this point in the semester. The pace is frenetic right now, I know. So be concise, be efficient, get the information, put it down, and move on. Right?
So you don't want a paragraph form?
I don't want paragraph form. I don't want sentences. The only sentence I ought to see is right here at theological significance. Give me one sentence, not two, and not a long one. I don't want one sentence going on for 8, 9 lines. All right? If you can't say it in 2.5 lines, you can't say it. All right? Everyone clear? All right? Basically, all this is doing is you're taking the plunge into a word study, getting wet, but not really having the opportunity to swim around yet much. I just want to get you to see if you can if you can synthesize, and if you can put in a synopsis the basic data with regard to Sha'an. That's what I want to see. That's the purpose of it. We'll get into more word studies next semester, far deeper and more detailed. But for this, I just want you introduced to these sources, see that you can use them, see that you can glean from them the pertinent data quickly, easily, and efficiently, and reproduce it accurately. All right? I gave an assignment like this one other time. Well, I think I already showed you that on Tuesday. Maybe I showed it to you on Tuesday when we're looking at these things on the concordance, how that the students came up with everything from 47 to 70-some usages for something that occurred 75 times. Don't do that. This is the reason I do it. See if you can be accurate in how you look at these things and accurately use them.